In 1904, two teenage boys, George and Stephen Jefferies, became Christians during the Welsh revival. Both became active members of the church, but it was George who stood out to the minister of Silo Chapel.
George was superior to other lads. There was a character in his face.
Both underwent an evangelical conversion, and that particular part of the valley was the most widely reported section of the revival at the beginning. There were hundreds and hundreds of people were converted during that early period of the revival.
Around the same time, another new movement made its way into the valley. Pentecostal churches from America began springing up with their own distinctive style of worship.
This was not a let's meet for 1 hour, let's preach for 15 minutes, let's do a hymn sandwich, and let's all go home to have Sunday lunch. This was somewhere where, in the context of worship, people actually expected to encounter God for themselves in very powerful and profound ways. And this was a place where you came and initial evidence speaking in other tongues as the Spirit gave utterance was one of the, in fact, the significant mark of Pentecostalism.
At first, George wasn't associated with the Pentecostals. In fact, he spoke against them. But Stephen's son, Edward, was only a young boy, and he went on holiday into West Wales, where he met Pentecostals, and he came back home, and he'd been speaking in tongues. And Mother didn't like it at all. But when they saw the transformation of this young lad, only about 10 years of age, they saw the transformation even in him, they were quite impressed and began to look at the thing more seriously. And then they threw in their lot with these early Pentecostals in South Wales.
The Jeffries brothers preached up and down the United Kingdom and made quite an impact. One visitor wrote,
Mr. George Jeffries is a fluent speaker with a good delivery. He speaks as a well-educated man and is intensely earnest.
We press on amongst them, eager to find out the reason for such an early morning stir.
George went from town to town. Nobody would know who he was. He would go and have a meeting in a small building somewhere. Within a few days, the building would be packed with people. There wouldn't be enough room to accommodate them. George went into Bingley Hall and packed it with 15,000 people. And during the 9 weeks he was there, they recorded something like 10,000 registered converts.
how did the established church react to the Pentecostal movement here?
Pentecostalism was a rude awakening. It was untidy, it was unusual, it was filled with mystery and new forms of worship. Some of it went slightly to the edge and over. And so established churches just didn't quite know what to do with it. And so there was a whole range of responses, from demonizing Pentecostalism as, one great quote, the last vomit of Satan, right through to suspicion and holding it at arm's length. But from the very earliest stage of Pentecostalism, it was very hard to resist the fact that something very powerful was taking place right in the life of the church in the UK.
But George wasn't satisfied with just travelling from town to town preaching. He wanted to set down roots for his converts and set up a permanent church. So in Belfast in 1915, he formed Elim Evangelistic Band.
George Jeffries was never a one-night stand preacher. He felt that people needed a sustained ministry. A lot of these were young people. You know, they knew some of the songs and hymns because lots of people went to church. But there was no systematic teaching, and he wanted to instill that, particularly bringing in the Pentecostal side as well, but doing basic teaching.